Reabsorption of water, electrolytes, and nutrients occurs along the length of the renal tubule structures, which are the proximal convoluted tubule, the nephron loop, and the distal convoluted tubule. Beginning with the proximal convoluted tubule, the structure reabsorbs all glucose in the filtrate, assuming that blood plasma glucose isn't excessively high. Blood glucose levels above 200 milligrams per deciliter is too high to recover all of the glucose that's traveling through the filtrate of the proximal convoluted tubule, and the remaining glucose that's not reabsorbed will appear in the urine. Consuming a large amount of sugar in a short period of time, or if the person has type 1 or type 2 diabetes mellitus, are some of the reasons why blood glucose levels may be elevated. The proximal convoluted tubule also reabsorbs all amino acids, vitamins, and calcium from the filtrate into the bloodstream. Almost all bicarbonate is reabsorbed from the filtrate as well. It reabsorbs about 67% of the water, sodium, and potassium from the filtrate into the bloodstream. Other structures will fine-tune the reabsorption of water, sodium, or potassium depending on what the body needs. In the cells that line the walls of the proximal convoluted tubule, sodium is transported by the activity of the sodium-potassium pumps, which require ATP energy to pump sodium from the filtrate to the bloodstream. Water follows sodium by osmosis through aquaporins, which are channels that promote the facilitated diffusion of water from the filtrate to the bloodstream. The sodium being pumped from the filtrate back into the blood acts to osmotically pull water into the bloodstream as well. Recovery of bicarbonate here is very important as well because bicarbonate is a fast-acting buffer that prevents increases or decreases in pH of blood plasma. Examining figure 25.17, it is easy to see that the proximal convoluted tubule is the site in which most of the reabsorption of substances in the filtrate is going to occur. Functionally, the nephron loop reabsorbs primarily water and sodium, and it does this in an interesting way. Being a U-shaped channel, the nephron loop has a descending part of the channel which travels into the renal medulla, which is called the descending limb, and it has an ascending part of the channel which travels up from the renal medulla towards the renal cortex, which is called the ascending limb. The descending limb is permeable only to water because it contains aquaporins, so it functions to reabsorb water from the filtrate that's traveling through it. The ascending limb is permeable to sodium because it contains sodium-potassium pumps, but it lacks aquaporins. The sodium that is pumped out of the filtrate and into the space that's surrounding the ascending limb functions to create an osmotic gradient so that water is pulled out of the nearby descending limb. What we see is that the filtrate gets more concentrated as it moves down the descending limb as water diffuses out by osmosis, and then the filtrate gets more diluted as it moves up the ascending limb as sodium is pumped out of the filtrate by the sodium-potassium pumps. The descending limb of the nephron loop is connected to the proximal convoluted tubule and is only permeable to water, while the ascending limb transports filtrate up to the distal convoluted tubule and is permeable to sodium in addition to a few other electrolytes, but it is not permeable to water. The nephron loop creates what is called a countercurrent multiplier system. Countercurrent means that fluid is flowing in the opposite directions of two adjacent pipes. In this case, those pipes are the limbs of the nephron loop, while the multiplier refers to the increasing and then decreasing solute concentrations as the filtrate moves down the descending limb and then up the ascending limb. Functionally, the distal convoluted tubule reabsorbs a little bit of sodium and water, but the fine-tuning of the reabsorption of both will occur in the collecting ducts. Figure 25.20 examines the countercurrent multiplier that is created in the nephron loop. Filtrate osmolarity becomes more concentrated as water is pulled from the descending limb, and then more diluted as filtrate moves up the ascending limb as sodium is removed from that filtrate. Notice that the filtrate begins at 300 milliosmoles, which is a typical osmolarity for most cells and body tissues, but at the end of the nephron loop, the filtrate is around 100 milliosmoles, which is much more diluted than most body fluids. In this way, the kidney prevents unnecessary losses of water and electrolytes by producing a filtrate that is more dilute than most body tissue fluids.